This episode is brought to you by Portland Distro. If you like underground music, movies, and more, go to portlanddistro.com for licensed merch, vinyl, CDs, and more. Plug in the discount code 10OFF, TENOFF, for a 10% discount at portlanddistro.com. Episode of Everything Went Black. Welcome back, Scott Hamilton of Ken Mode. He returns, and we talked about this a while back. He scored a film, a short, called The Druid's Hand. And in addition to Scott, we have the co-writer and director of that film, Mitch Oliver. In addition to making films, Mitch is also a fellow podcaster. Check out his show, The Terror Table. I actually listen to it regularly. I've been ripping through episodes. If you like horror movies, and I love horror movies, and any of you guys out there who listen to Necromaniacs, please check out his show. You'll find that his opinions align very closely to the opinions of the Necromaniacs camp. Before we get going, I want to shout out the horsemen of the podcasting apocalypse. On Monday, Horror Wolf 666, another excellent horror podcast hosted by Brandon Legion. Tuesday is the premier extreme metal podcast, Into the Necrosphere, hosted by Jackie Smith. Wednesday, of course, is Everything Went Black Day. Thursday, Necro Thursday, you can find us doing the Necromaniacs Horror Podcast. I co-host that with Mike Scandato and Jeff Kashid. Sunday, Carl Hikara comes at you with Soul Knox, a show dedicated to all things esoteric, dark, and macabre. Carl and I are in the middle of doing a collaboration. Or actually, we're not in the middle. I would say we're in the beginning of our collaboration called Darkness Weaves, where we explore the work of Carl Edward Wagner, a criminally underrated horror fiction and dark fantasy author. If you like the podcast, that's awesome. Really appreciate all the support. Definitely like us, give us some 5-star ratings, but you can also support the podcast through the Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can become a supporter and you get access to all of the bonus content, which includes whole sub-series as well as Friday staff picks. For $5 a month, you get the bonus material plus early access to all of the episodes. And for $25, you become a sponsor for the month. And that means I will give you a custom ad read, similar to last week's episode. And it could be about anything. Your project, your business, a band, your own podcast, whatever. And it could be for 1 month or 2 months or all eternity. So, gentlemen, welcome to Everything Went Black. And, Scott's been on the show before. And he's the one who turned me on to the Druid's Hand and also the podcast, The Terror Table. And Mitch, so you're the writer and director of the Druid's Hand and also the host of the Terror Table. So that's pretty cool. I'm becoming a pretty avid listener to the Terror Table, actually.
Oh man, that's awesome. Thanks. Actually, likewise, I've been listening to crushing a bunch of Everything Went Black and Necromaniacs as well.
Oh, awesome,
since man. Scott put me onto all your stuff as well, so I really appreciate that. And I co-wrote the Druid's Hand with a friend, Jesse Sawitsky, but then directed it, and here I am.
Scott actually previewed me a little bit of kind of your story with filmmaking. Let maybe talk about that first. And so you kind of came to filmmaking later, I guess, right? It wasn't sort of the thing that you didn't go to film school or anything like that. You just kind of
No, I didn't go to film school. I had considered it. It was during the pandemic. Just kind of hit a wall, like I'm sure a lot of people had, and figured that I needed to do something. I just wasn't feeling, fulfilled in any way in my life. And film has always been the most important thing to me. I've always wanted to pursue it, but it always seemed out of reach. And then once, everything locked down, it just kind of had to face the fact that like anything can change at any moment. So, you may as well just go for what you want out of life. And, a big thing with podcasting, which I know because obviously we're on your podcast, you create opportunities for yourself by opening up a podcast and reaching out to folks. And I was lucky enough to interview and discuss my passion, which is horror films, with a lot of amazing people who are all, making a living doing it. And they all have their own different paths. But, it's also one of the things that connected me with Skot. And basically every good thing that I have in my life right now has come from creating those opportunities on your own.
So how do you and Skot meet exactly? I'm not sure about that.
I'm a longtime admirer of Skot Hamilton. So I grew up in Saskatoon. I now live in Vancouver. But, I grew up going to local underground shows where I'd see Skot performing with his band Adeline and the various other acts that he'd be involved with, like New Jack and all that stuff. And I always looked up to him. And I spent a lot of time at CD Plus in Center Mall for Saskatchewan listeners.
I don't know. CD Plus might be a Canadian chain. I'm not sure that made it to the States. That was one of the last big chain record stores, that like mall stores, that went down swinging pretty hard. I was employed by one of the final CD Pluses.
Yeah, and it's funny because I ended up working there for like 3 weeks. It's the only job I've ever been fired from, but I never ended up getting to even work a shift with Skot. But I was always an admirer of what the work that Skot did. And, I got into heavy music at a young age. Heavy music and horror movies were always such a big thing for me. And it was, going to once again, this is very local, but like the Basement in Saskatoon was an underground club that, where I got to see like my first taste of real underground music that wasn't like anything that you could find on the radio. And it was like really, groundbreaking bands like Adeline and seeing Skot and these local guys doing that, it just drove my passion into, I ended up becoming a musician, and I played in bands for 15 years. And it was all it was that moment, seeing Skot do that, and then see him in CD Plus and going to his staff picks and seeing what the guy's listening to. And I'd always like pick up whatever he was into, because I was just like a little fanboy. And yeah, it was that's how I got to know, or that's what I knew of Skot before. But then I got involved with the film festival in Saskatoon there, and Skot's the programmer at our art house theater, the Broadway Theater. And through that, and just being able to bump shoulders at the festival, talk a little bit about horror movies, inviting him onto the podcast, just pretty much became fast friends a couple of years ago.
So you were kind of working in more of like, for lack of a better term, like kind of like the administrative end of filmmaking, working, organizing with the film festivals, things like that, and not so much the technical side of things. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, that was like my involvement with film before I moved out to Vancouver here, and before I made the Druid's Hand, was through the film festival, and then just talking about it on podcasts. I was a plumber a couple of years ago, so like I was in the trade for 6 years, and that was the last job I had before I transitioned into filmmaking. And I've been very lucky and very fortunate to, there's also, not to downplay the amount of work I've put in to get here, but I managed to find my way and find my footing in the industry here, and it's all going really, really well. And so that's what I do for a day job now. And in my free time, I'm making movies, trying to get more of my own stuff made.
So what is the first step? I mean, I look at filmmaking as kind of like sorcery, you know what I mean? It's, there's like, I know how to put a Blu-ray into a Blu-ray player, or hit a link, and there's a picture and music and dialogue and a story. Okay.
Yeah.
So what was your trajectory from starting from square one into actually making a film, and that whole process of like the technical side, learning how to tell a story, like all that sort of stuff?
I think that's the thing. So I didn't go to film school, but the truth is I've been studying film my entire life, and it started out with special features on DVDs. I've always been a collector of physical media. And when DVDs started coming out, and I would just buy everything that I could, or rent everything I could get my hands on. and I'd watch the special features, and that's how I kind of learned how the sausage gets made. And that part became so addicting for me, and I've always been fascinated by it. But yeah, I didn't think that I was ever actually going to do it until a couple of years ago. And now that I'm doing it, I can't imagine doing anything else. But now for me, it's just, coming up with the idea, getting the story on the page and really, really thinking about it. I know when Jesse and I co-wrote The Druid's Hand, Skot was the first person that I gave the script to. And it's because I trust him and I trust his taste. And I also know that Skot he's very opinionated, like most people who are, when their opinion is worth anything, they can't just be someone who just loves everything. He can articulate why he didn't like certain things. And that just, it helped the story, and it gave me the confidence to get out and actually make the damn thing. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. So what was the learning curve like, though? Because I'm always fascinated by people who make these transitions. Like you said, being a plumber is it's great work. I have a huge respect for the trades and, craftsmanship and that sort of thing. But, working with like a crescent wrench and channel locks versus making films.
Yeah, it's completely different.
Completely different thing. So what was that learning curve like, though? Like,
it's, not to out myself to everyone, but you have to pretend like what the fuck you're talking about.
I know that feeling, definitely.
Yeah. And even if you don't have the answer, you got to come up with one quick. And as a director, your film is going to be terrible and no one's going to be working their ass off on it. It's such hard work. And we just talked about like plumbing, the trades. It's really hard work. But making a film was the hardest work I've ever gone through. But it's also so rewarding at every turn. But it's leaning into everyone else's strengths. I'm not a cinematographer. I don't know everything about lenses. I don't know everything about a camera. But I got a really incredible DOP in my corner when we decided to make the film. And, you learn from everyone. I think it was even, who was it? Was it Kurt Russell, who's like my god. He didn't go to film school. He went and started working on film sets, and he got a job in every department because he just wanted to know how people do their jobs and how it works. And I know David Fincher is the same way, is that he's like, I need to have a good idea of what everyone does in their field, and that explains why he makes masterful films. Obviously I'm not comparing myself. It's just that's the way that I'm going about it now. Is I try to soak up every second with creative people learning what they do.
Yeah, Fincher's definitely has his own sort of unique vision, and I think that I think it could be said even similar with music, where there are people who have like incredible technical ability, but maybe there's like that left field element that they might not have because of the rigors of studying it in a technical manner. And I think that
I was going to say, like, that kind of gets into the conversation about, the function of school and whether someone is prepared to make the most of being schooled in the arts in any capacity, right? Like if they go to music or film school or whatever, it depends on what you want to do with those tools. And if you learn to just be really masterful from a technical perspective, but you wind up investing so much in that corner that your brain kind of goes into stasis, then that's a dangerous thing too, right? Like you do have people cautioning against being over-schooled sometimes. And, we've got an entire generation of like Shredder's Delight, Eddie Van Halen type guitar players who don't write compelling music. They don't, eventually they're, they would be absolutely appalled by what it is that I do. But they don't have anything to tell me that I'm interested in hearing as a result. And I think there's completely, that exists in film in a huge way as well, I think.
Yeah, that's like one of the most compelling thing about art in general, is just how you can just grab some guy off the street and maybe he's like a genius, you know what I mean? Like he might be creating something that's just like completely resonates with you versus someone who has spent all this time learning all the subtleties and technical things. And there's validity sort of in both of those approaches, But so Mitch, was was it always horror for you? Like, or was there, when you were essaying into making films,
Yeah.
was it always horror? Always.
I'm just a fan of cinema in general and the art form of storytelling, but it's absolutely from the get-go. Like when Jesse and I decided to make the Druid's Hand, we didn't even have the conversation about what it was going to be. We both knew without saying anything, it's going to be a horror movie. And now I'm like, gearing up for the next one. And it's absolutely, I'm just keep on amping up the horror. And I definitely want to work on, other things eventually. But right now, like it's my wheelhouse. It's where I'm comfortable. It's where I feel the most, I guess, safe with myself. Like I trust myself in horror more than any other genre because I've spent so much time not only just watching and it's just the analyzing it. And, that's something that comes with the podcast as well, is when you set for a while there, the Terror Table, we went every single week, not ever missing an episode. Now lately it's slowed down because I'm living on the other side of the country, but it keeps you in. That's like a school of itself, is to, just keep focused on the genre and exploring films that you haven't seen before.
Now the podcast predated the film, right? I'm sure. Okay. I was looking at the dates and everything. I was like, all right, so this is the podcast has predated that.
Yeah. We started that 6 years ago now. Just insane.
Because you guys cover a lot of the stuff that I like to watch, and your opinions are pretty much in line with the opinions I have about things too. Which
I've noticed that listening to Necromaniacs is we definitely are kindred spirits.
Yeah. So what was some of the stuff like with your experience with horror? Like what brought you into the genre? Like what was your like as a kid? Like what drew you in basically?
Yeah. It was definitely like I'm sure the same for both of you, the video store era of going into the video store, seeing all the cover art. And that was like the section. It was almost like the forbidden section. Whenever you're told don't touch something, your instinct is going to be touch it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that was what happened with me. I think the my favorite film of all time is Jaws, and I still think that was the first horror film I ever saw. I know a lot of people don't consider it a horror film, but they can fuck themselves. But there was that. But then I got into, like, my parents would take me in that video store, and I would see it was Child's Play 2. Oddly enough, like the sequel, I saw Child's Play 2 before the first one, and there was something about the cover art, and I wasn't like a psychopath kid where I was like, oh, I think Chucky's fucking cool and I want to be just like him, but I also wasn't scared. I was just like so enamored by it. And thinking about it, like I got into like the Leprechaun movies when I was really young too. There's something about being a kid and then having the imagery of like killer dolls or a leprechaun. But yeah, there was like that, and like the gate was a huge one.
That's a good
Canadian film. Yeah, which has been so cool because I have like one of my favorite pieces of artwork I have is a limited edition Mondo poster for the gate. And when I moved out to Vancouver here, I actually got to meet the director's friends of friends and got to have dinner with them, and it's so amazing. So I'm like, that movie fucking changed me when I was a kid, and I think that's one that doesn't get enough love. But yeah, like the gate.
That's a good one. I recommend that to people actually quite a bit. Scott, what about you? I don't think I ever asked you this question. What was the entry point?
The one that I remember the most, so like the big thing with me was I have a hard time placing the actual time. I remember at my youngest moments in a video store wanting to pull from that section. It's big time video store stuff, because just going into the section was the most exciting thing that happened that week alone, even though I wasn't allowed to see any of the movies. And I remember having the only thing I was able to rent that I was given a pass on was Michael Jackson's Thriller on VHS, which also came with per Mitch's discussion earlier, it came with the making of that was attached to it, which is obviously much longer than the actual music video. And so I got a pass to see that one, and I kept watching that over and over again, even though it wasn't really scary, but it was like anything that was related to a deviation on what it was I was supposed to dig as a kid. Like, I didn't like cartoons. I didn't like things that other kids like, but I liked Count Dracula because it was all messed up. I get it now because it kind of belongs to a pocket of films that are actually quite depressing. And so it actually is really congruent with the type of stuff I'm into. But I would cheat in that way. But I think that the first full-blooded horror film that I can recall having seen, and it was a bit of a steamroller moment for sure, was at a neighbor's place. I saw Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. So I saw that one first, which had the dual effect of it came with the doc and video packaged prior to the movie starting. So I was like, oh, okay, well, like, loud guitar, like, is the very similar thing when it came to metal and just rock music in general. Access was the problem. And so it already had a, sick guitar solo on a guitar that was shaped like a skeleton baked into the thing. So I was all in on that. And also, as like I'm kind of more or less, and Mitch has had to hear me talk about this ad nauseum because I've been on 2 episodes of Terror Table that are related to Nightmare on Elm Street. Is that right?
Yeah, I think 2. You've been on like 5 times, but
yeah, I know, because we covered the first one and the second one on your like Nightmare on Elm Street run, but then we also did the rating episode that I was a part of, which yes. I think I advanced some very hot takes, but the third one obviously like is everyone's favorite. I think that it was the right it was the right mixture of elements for I couldn't have been older than 7. I was probably in and around there, and it just turned into an appetite thing at that point, because I think at one point that was in and around, like within a few years it was getting into like divorce territory for my folks, and it was just like, well, we got to keep them busy, well, like we can't keep our like there's just other life stuff going on, and I mean, probably could have stood to have had that not happen, but at the same time, all of a sudden, no one's keeping an eye on me, and I'm getting my hands on a lot of stuff that I maybe shouldn't, and that led to the glorious day when my mom just got them to put a full pass on the computer at my local Family Video that just said, rent him whatever he wants. I don't want a phone call about, like, because they always had to call her and say, can we rent this to him? And she just got sick of getting the phone calls.
I have the exact same story. Like the around 7 years old, divorce territory. Don't bother me at work. Let him rent whatever he wants. Exactly. Why is my kid fucking? Yeah, no wonder it turned out the way. No wonder we are the way we are.
Well, awesome. And I think you'll remember this too, Mitch. I think I might have even mentioned this last time I was on the podcast, Mike. For us in town here, almost every video store had a 7 movies, 7 days, $7 deal, and so that was you just made a stack of stuff out of that section and got busy. Now, granted, you spend a lot of that time like repeat viewing all the franchise stuff. So like, it was a little wasted because it took me too long to get around to renting some of the stuff that are like my favorite movies now.
Right.
But so like, like I slugged it out in the franchise territory in a pretty big way. But like, yeah, Nightmare 3 was probably the first full-blooded real horror movie that I can recall seeing.
That's a great start.
That is a good one. I mean, everyone who listens to this podcast knows that, they know this story. But for me, it was my mom and dad took me to see The Exorcist in a drive-in when I was like, I don't know, like 4 or something like that. Like it's literally the earliest memory I have is watching that movie in the car with my parents. And it kind of put me off to horror films, actually. That early part of my life, I was like, I'm terrified of this stuff. It's too scary. I don't know what I don't even know what this is, but
that'll do it.
Oh yeah. And then I started watching stuff on television, like the Hammer horror films and, Chiller Theater here in the tri-state area. There's, Channel 5, 9 and 11 always had horror movies playing on the weekends and things like that. And I think it was actually the Hammer stuff that really drew me in, Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee and all that cool stuff.
I don't know if I've heard you talk a ton about that, Mike. Are you still a fan of that stuff?
Oh, I love it.
Oh, cool.
We don't talk about that stuff. I think actually we should dive into that a little bit more on Necromania.
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of that stuff. I played in a band that had that as a like thematic frame, like a horror rock band for many years, and there was a lot of references to that and like the Abacus stuff and everything like that. I really like that stuff. I don't know a ton of people that dig it, so it just occurred to me I haven't heard you on the podcast talk about it a ton.
Yeah, I love it. I know Mike likes it too, so I'm sure we'll get into it now at some point.
Yeah, open invitation where we can do that on the Tear Table as well, because I've been wanting to dig into the like Hammer stuff. That's like a new discovery for me, is really getting into that over the last couple of years. But now, like, I saw Mask of the Red Death for the first time a couple of years ago, like right before making the Druid's Hand, and I've seen that movie like 10 times since. Like, it's like I put it on in the background, just fucking love the mood and everything.
Are you talking about like the Corman one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Like, that movie is, I think that Corman's his Poe adaptations are underrated, just because people like to drag his name or whatever and say, oh yeah, he just makes schlock or whatever. But I just watched the Raven for the first time. It's so good. It's so good.
And Witchfinder General. The most evil shit. Like, oh god, in the mood and atmosphere, it's just unreal.
Yeah, Vincent Price was a big favorite of mine early on in life, because that was another thing. There would be the 4:30 movie, which would be on weekdays when I was a kid, and I would come home from school and the 4:30 movie would come on, and they would do like a whole week of those Corman movies. It would be like all the Poe adaptations, and that was my introduction to Vincent Price and Roger Corman's films and Edgar Allan Poe. And when I was like, my reading skills had matured to the point where I could, attempt reading a Poe novel or short stories. That's what got me into reading Edgar Allan Poe, was the Vincent Price, Roger Corman pieces. So yeah.
Well, apropos to, I didn't mean to do that as I did not do that on purpose. This is a weird question for Mitch, but I'm curious because there's a bit of an age gap even between Mitch and I. But I will start with asking Mike, do you know about the hilarious House of Frightenstein, speaking of Vincent Price?
I don't know that at all, actually.
I don't know.
Okay.
I never heard.
No, you don't. Okay. Well, see, Mitch, I thought maybe you, because it is a Canadian production, but there is this, I'm gonna have to send you guys tons of information about this. I was just talking about this last weekend with another friend. Actually, we were watching Witchfinder General and listening to music with the sound down on Witchfinder. So actually just watching that. But Vincent Price was featured on this wild borderline cable access show that was shot in Canada and Ontario in the I think it was the early 70s, maybe the late 60s, no, early 70s. I should know all this. This should all be fresh in my mind, but it was like this variety show that played in Canada as a kid's show, but was playing more as like a show for like college stoners in the States. I know it got picked up there. And it was mainly all done by, like, all of the acting was done mainly by the one guy. They shot like 120 episodes of this thing with like skeleton on-screen crew, but it's like a variety show that's horror themed. And the guy who wrote and was like the creative mind behind it played like 80% of the people on screen. It is a fever dream. It's terrifying and weird and like, but it doesn't intend to be. But again, back to I referenced Count Duckula earlier. It's supposed to be for kids, but it's like really, it's all about like disappointment, and nothing ever works out for anyone. And like half of the sketches end with like somebody crying or something like that in this vacuous like dungeon. And just like nothing, like just the whole core of the show is about shit not working out for people, and everyone's bad at what they do. But like, because there's only so many people in it, they have all these weird bumpers. And Vincent Price, they brought in because and according to the literature surrounding it, I guess he just wanted to do more stuff that kids could see. Like he just he did all horror movies, and he dug, like he never got asked to do anything for kids, so he does all these poems and stuff like that. And they had him in for, I can't remember how many days it was, but he shot just like it must have been hundreds of these things, and I think it was just over the course of like a weekend. But I guess he was like getting pretty loaded while he was doing it, and so depending on which ones they pull, like he looks drunk. And he's wearing all sorts of weird costumes, and you can tell he's just getting silly. It is some of the weirdest Vincent Price esoterica that you can get your hands on. It's fucking awesome. Highly recommend looking it up.
You unlocked a memory, Scott. I looked it up. I've absolutely remember watching this on TV, and like it's so this is great. It's just like triggering memories, but it's like kind of Munsters-y, like a vibe. Yeah, kind of that vibe.
Yeah, if you get back to doing a Vincent Price like themed anything, Mike, you should look up Hilarious House of Frankenstein before you do. Just do yourself a treat.
Can you find it online? It's somewhere like on YouTube or whatever.
There's full episodes online. Yeah, I just found this out because last weekend because of Witchfinder General, I was hanging out with my friend and I asked him about it and he didn't know what it was, and so that ended up being what was on in the background afterwards. It's again, it's nothing shy of a fever dream. It is wild shit.
That sounds great. It sounds, things like that. It's funny how that was you would find these things that were intended for kids back then that were just like terrifying, or in this case, very cynical and dark. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it somehow was meant for kids.
I know, because we just mentioned the age gap, but like that's the thing is, like, when I was watching Jaws and Child's Play as a kid, like none of that shit scared me at all. But Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps, they were like kids programming, it just completely fucked me up. Like they scared the living shit out of me. And like now going back to it, obviously it doesn't hold up, but it's really weird how that stuff that's geared for kids and it's like, rated G or and that's the stuff that really got under my skin.
I think that's a thing of the past these days, though, as far as like, sort of young people seem to be a little bit more coddled, I think, in their entertainment, so it's unfortunate.
It is, but you never know when they're gonna flip onto something on Netflix that they're not supposed to see. Like I think about that all the time, because that's how I got to see like The Exorcist at a young age. Was my dad had an illegal satellite dish,
nice.
And so like when he wasn't home, I'd be flipping through, and that's how I saw American Werewolf in London for the first time. And I remember like that movie scared the shit out of me when I was younger, actually, and now it's one of my favorites. But didn't pick up on the comedy as a kid, and it just messed me up.
Yeah, the comedy is what makes it even more disturbing, I think.
Oh yeah,
some of the best like horror comedy, the comedy actually supplements the horror aspects of it. I feel we just talked about Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, the Bob Clark film.
Yeah,
over on Necromaniacs, and that I saw that once again. I saw an edited version of that on TV when I was a kid, and it was terrifying to me. And even now, when I rewatched it as an adult, I still was it was very uneasy, that movie. Even the comedy elements of it, everything just seems so dark and like unsettling in that movie, and that's what I think of horror comedy. I don't like the broad comedic stuff that happens in movies sometimes that are going into that genre more,
Well, even for Bob Clark too, I think that it gets overlooked because it's such an effectively, I think still such a scary movie, but Black Christmas has a bunch of stuff baked in there that are really funny moments, but it never gets in the way of it being scary. And if anything, just makes it more realistic because of like the age group, all the people hanging out. They are telling jokes that are very well. It's more that they're telling jokes that aren't landing, and that's what is funny about it. Like, because there's Margot Kidder's character is just always like kind of plastered, making an asshole out of herself, and really making things uncomfortable for anyone else in the room. But because you're not in the room, it's kind of funny. But there's some realism to that, right? Like it's the funny, not funny elements of that movie are actually like. They're just really grim most of the time, I guess.
That's what I've noticed too, is like there's movies like Black Christmas where like I'm currently like a producer that I'm working with to get my next film off the ground. He is just becoming a horror fan, but I'm exposing him to this stuff, and he's like, I don't know how you can watch this stuff and handle it. Like I was even showing him the Evil Dead remake, but it's like, to me it's funny because it's so extremely over the top, or the tone is so grim. Like in Black Christmas, that's a movie I watch twice a year, but whenever you hear Billy talking on the phone, it's so grim and so dark that I can't help but giggle, because it's just like, what, it's just deranged. I love that.
It's a kind of an unsung Bob Clark movie is Death Dream. Have you ever heard?
I thought you might say that.
Yeah. That movie is so intense, man, and it's sad, and it's just like it's an anti-war film. It's just such a dark movie, and I think we're going to cover that on Necromaniacs. We started a like a voice line. People can like call and leave messages on this voicemail that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And we just started a couple weeks ago, and that was like a film that a listener had recommended that we do. And it was a movie that I've been trying to convince Mike and Jeff to do for like a couple of years now. So I'm like, all right, now we have to do it, Yeah, such a good movie.
Yeah, it's wild.
No, I mean, you were either going to say that or Baby Geniuses, so it had to be one of the two.
Yeah. So just getting back to the Druid's Hand, Mitch. It's a short film. Is there ever any sort of plan to expand that into a feature at some point?
Sorry, just one second. Yeah, absolutely. I would like to do that. I think just for now, I'm focusing on, getting another short under my belt, or showing, doing another story first, or a couple more, but I have full intent to revisit it at some point. Because I think there's a reason why it was the first one that I did. And I think even for people who have had the chance to see it, we fit a lot into a 15-minute time frame. And I'd like to have more time to breathe and to explore the themes that, some of them didn't end up kind of making it onto the screen because they're just trying to put too much in. But it's something I'm very, very interested in doing eventually.
Yeah, Scott shared a link with me to check it out, and I some of the things that come to mind, I wanted to ask you about this, was any of those like 70s devil movies, was any of that stuff an influence on this?
Big time. Yeah, big time. I love I love stories of like true occult, and specifically the Satanic Panic era of the 80s and 90s. Like that's something that really fascinates me, and obviously that all stemmed from like the iconic imagery in movies like The Devil's Reign, and like all that kind of just really grim, evil Satan. Like I'm just a big fan of Satan.
Yeah, I picked up on that. Like I watched it a couple times. I mean, it's a 15-minute film, so it's you can check it out a few times, and within an hour, and the atmosphere, it has kind of like that folksy like vibe to it, like that High Plains kind of vibe. And definitely I was thinking of Devil's Reign specifically that's one of my favorites of that 70s vibe of films. Yeah. How can you go wrong with Ernest Borgnine and William Shatner in the same movie?
Exactly. Yeah, that one's great. And like even there's a couple like when people have a chance to see it, but there's a scene where the two guys are killing a woman. There's a bunch of like imagery on the wall, and some of that's from like classic stuff like the original Wicker Man, which is also a favorite. So yeah, big fan of folk horror in general. That's kind of the sandbox I'm going to continue playing in for a little bit here.
That's interesting, especially like in North America, really. Because most people think of folk horror, it's like a British Cornish kind of thing, with Christianity coming by way of the Roman Empire and the pagan,
for sure.
And what's interesting about North America is just there's a very rich folk sort of mythology that's native to this continent as well, and a lot of people haven't even really gotten into that yet, really.
Yeah, that's my exact thought process, and I'm a big fan of movies like Pan's Labyrinth, where like what Guillermo does there, and what was the other one that I was thinking about? Just movies the stories that meld in classics, like other classic stories that have stood the test of time, like like Alice in Wonderland is obviously what influenced Pan's Labyrinth, but then mixing it in with the cold reality. I'm just a big fan of that.
No,
sorry, Mike.
Go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
It is one thing that I dig about it. Mitch, you've heard me mention this before, but for folks who haven't had a chance to travel through Saskatchewan, where we're from, having a chance to see the landscape, the way it was all shot and everything like that. Because a lot of the time, if you're a Saskatchewan filmmaker, you just go someplace else and make movies that aren't don't have anything to do with Saskatchewan. I would hope that by the end of this film's run, that this is what the Saskatchewan tourism is. This is how they introduce people to the province.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, you were on site, you were on set for when we were filming it and everything. That whole like witch burning site at the end, that's all still there. It hasn't been cleaned up. It's on the land, so.
So if somebody comes across that, they're going to think that people were executed out.
You love the idea of kids breaking onto the land and coming across that, because it's a sight to see.
Yeah, I've done that drive across Canada before, actually, on the last year. On the last tour we did.
Well, I think you guys were supposed to play Regina, right? And then something happened with that show. Is that? Am I remembering that correctly? That show got canceled, actually. It was right, because I was gonna come out and see that. Like, I mean, unfortunately, like when you're in this area of the country, sometimes if you want to go see a show, you're traveling 3 hours each way to make it out. But I still, after all these years, haven't seen Tombs live yet. So I thought it was gonna be my shot, but it didn't pan out.
We'll be out in the fall, actually. The current routing I saw goes through that same region.
Okay.
Of like west to east, and like we skip the more.
Yeah, I'd imagine you probably can't say specifically yet, but we'll talk offline. Like, hopefully I'm not out of town, because we've got dates that I'm not allowed to talk about yet that I'm out of town for in the fall. But we've got to make that happen at some point.
Yeah, it's like we skip the meth area of the United States to do southern Canada, and then do like Chicago, and then go back up into Canada, and then go back to the civilized part of the United States.
Well, depending on the time of year, I have a execution site in Saskatchewan I can show you if you're.
Oh, cool! You want to execute somebody while we're there? For the hell of it?
Just for a tribute for Druid's hand.
Yeah.
But yeah, that part of the country, it's like I just remember I was texting somebody while we drove through part of that overnight. I remember it was like, because the distances are so far that sometimes you have to do an overnight drive through there. And I was like, yeah, I took photos and sent it to this person, and she's like, where are you? I'm like, southern Canada, and it's like, yeah, there's like werewolves and like, man bats and wendigos and all sorts of stuff up here, and yeah, it's a real wild place, man, for sure.
See, you're looping back around though. That's the thing, is we should be mining like per folk horror. We have tales, we have legends and everything up here.
So many.
Like, and as to why we ignore them, I don't know. There's lots to work with as far as the notion of North American folk horror. There's no lack of stories to pull from, like both states and Canada. There's a ton to work with. We just, a lot of the time, I understand aesthetically the folk horror thing. I think it feels very British, but what we know to be folk horror just has its ties and its roots in that. So I understand us constantly running back to and aping Wicker Man. It makes sense, but we have a lot to work with up here for sure, and some like grim past that people are still uncomfortable talking about.
That's exactly it. It's all about being able to do it respectfully. Because like there is like a lot of the true horrors in Canada are all real. Like it's all stuff that actually happened. And I know like that was another thing that might be kind of off topic, but like the whole aesthetic that we had, like the whole reason why I still till this day, like I have every desire in me to go back and make feature films in Saskatchewan, because it's such a beautiful landscape for horror. But that's why movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the biggest influence for the Druid's Hand. And it's because it looks like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre looks like Saskatchewan. Like that's the whole aesthetic. It's very similar. And I know like that's why those movies really, like that one really messed me up as a kid. Jeepers Creepers really messed me up when I was younger, because it also looked like this could be just on the highway 5 minutes from my front door. And yeah, it's just something about the backwoods redneck type stuff. It works perfectly for the prairies.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I look forward to that. And I think that's just really fertile ground that a lot of people haven't really mined, Now with your script writing, what is there any, are you a reader of horror as well, or just,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what sort of, like literature and writing or anything like that might have influenced some of the work that you're doing?
Well, now, like, I've always been an avid reader, most of my life, and there's a lot of, like, like, I'm a big fan of, like, Cormac McCarthy stuff, and, like, those really gritty, like, movie, like, I think it came to mind because I just read The Road.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, like, that's the kind of stuff I really like. There's a book with Donald Ray Pollock, The Devil All the Time, which they just made a movie out of it. It came out a couple of years ago. It's fine, but the book is that's one of the best books I've ever read in my life. But there's that stuff. But lately, I know a lot of screenwriters feel differently on this, but I feel like I like reading scripts. And so I've been reading, I try and read as many scripts as I can, because it will help me, clean up my form. But it also shows that there really is no rules in writing a script. Like, you look at any of the most current stuff that's selling and making big waves at the box office, it's all very clinical and to the point and just kind of bare bones, which is understandable because you got to pass around to a crew, and it's all about just making it make sense for everyone. They're not there to read your prose. But then I read Jacob's Ladder recently, and I think that's my favorite script I've ever read. And it's like, it reads like it's half of it's written in prose. It just reads so well. And yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't think I've ever actually read a script. I mean, I'm not a filmmaker, but yeah, that's, the little bit of that I have read is like, just like bare bones direction and dialogue, you know, and it's interesting that was written more like a prose piece,
Yeah. Like, of course there are moments where, like, the whole thing with screenwriting now is, like, everyone who wants to give you advice, they say there's got to be more white on the page. There's got to be less, say more with less. And I'm like, I understand that and I respect that, but I really like enjoying what I'm reading. So, like, sure. There's so many screenplays that I've read recently that, like, Jacob's Ladder just really stood out to me, and it kind of blew my mind. I'm like, I can't believe this movie was made. And then, watching the movie again afterwards, and fuck, it just has jumped up so high in my books. Like, I watched that one when I was too young, didn't get it. It flew over my head. Watch it again recently after reading the screenplay, and it's one of my favorites now, I think.
Yeah, that's one of the most affecting pieces of work. I absolutely, we talked about that, I think, in the lead up to Druid's Hand, if I'm not mistaken, Mitch. Both of us, big shared love for that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just recently rewatched that within the last few months, and that's like one of my favorites, that movie. It's just just the vibe and the tone of that movie, and just that kind of, the ending is like kind of like a existentially dark ending.
Yeah. It's bananas, the shit that they got on screen in that movie. And at that time, like, the fact that was a wide release movie that, was very successful is just mind blowing to me. But
yeah, can you imagine that getting greenlit today?
And well, they remade it a couple of years ago. Of course, I haven't seen it, but
yeah, but we don't talk about that.
No, exactly.
I didn't even know it was remade. Really?
Yeah, and just from the trailer that I watched, it's like they went a erotic thriller route.
Oh man!
Like, Jacob's Ladder just
it
makes you think.
It looks like a joke. It doesn't look real. It doesn't look like the same. It doesn't look like a remake of Jacob's Ladder. You'd have to be told, like, you have to wait for the title to come up. But like, it's embarrassing.
Yeah,
oh, man, that's a bummer.
Yeah,
that was actually one of the ones for. I think I might have referenced this when we were. That's why we were talking about it, Mitch. It was because I referenced that first chunk of music on the soundtrack was a big one for me on the soundtrack work I did for Druid's Hand, actually. Just the first piece of music. It's like the way that it's formatted on the actual physical soundtrack is kind of sort of nonsense, but like there's a big chunk of that one that mixes that is melodic, but then it breaks into some dissonance and some kind of like more textural stuff. And that was, I think, something I pointed to you as something I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But that I don't think I'm remembering it all now. It's all coming back to me. That wasn't on any streaming sites. Like, I just have a cassette copy of it. So I think we were talking about that, and I think I might have sent you like a YouTube link, and I was kind of going like, this is the pocket.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been looking for that. Like, cause I like to listen to soundtracks or scores while I write. And that's what was great, was when we were writing the Druid's Hand, Skot had provided all of this material from, some stuff that you did by yourself, and then some stuff that was kind of negative tracks on Adeline Records and stuff like that. And I love, like, it's the vibe that Skot can create. And, you know, I think that he really boosted our film with The Druid's Hand. Was like, it's a really evil story. It's very bleak and dark. There's not a shred of almost humanity in it. Like, it's just mean. And I kind of like that. Like, that's kind of my vibe. But it's also like, it's really sad. And then when we gave it to Skot to, you know, lay the tracks down and we got it back at, like, I'll never forget the moment where me and Jesse and Ray were sitting in Scott's office there and just watching the film for the first time with his score. It was like, God damn, you found a way to make our sad, evil movie so much more brutal and sad. And yeah, it's so happy with it.
You have Mitch Clark, the former UFC MMA fighter, cast in the film. So how'd you come across him?
He was a guest on the Terror Table.
Really? Man, I didn't. I have to find that episode. Okay,
yeah,
I haven't heard that one.
No, and he's become a very good friend. He was in town because he's originally from Saskatoon, but he now lives in Edmonton. But he was in town because he's a pro wrestler as well. And one of the programmers and the assistant festival director for the film fest in Saskatoon, Jeff, he also coordinates and hosts Prairie Pro Wrestling, which is like, you know, kind of underground pro wrestling. And I'd never been to one of those things, but he messaged me. He's like, hey, Mitch Clark, like the former UFC fighter, he's a big horror fan. You should reach out to him. And I did. And yeah, that was one of those things where, yeah, we talk all the time still. And he was a big reason why I was able to take this leap. Cause he kind of gave me some really good advice and, you know, put some confidence in me to push myself and try something. And it just seemed natural to be like, well, if I'm going to do this, you got to act, you got to be in it. And
that's awesome.
And he was immediately down. And I don't know how much has been shared at this point, but I feel like I can say it. Like he did great in the film. I loved working with him and I'm going to do it again eventually. Absolutely. But he just acted in a feature length horror film that was filmed in Calgary there. So I'm very excited for that to come out and people to see. And he's acting now. And
that's awesome. That's
great. I'm so proud of him.
Yeah, I like to see when those guys have like a post, like something good to go to instead of just getting, their brains scrambled and
exactly.
Up, have like CTE and that sort of thing,
Exactly. And I think we put him, that dude, honestly, we tortured all three of our cast members on that movie. You look at Gabe, who played the creature there, like she's covered head to toe in black makeup. And I think she was in the shower that night for a good part of 2 hours, just trying, and she was still scrubbing stuff off apparently weeks later. Just like couldn't get everything out because we went really ham on that makeup. But then we filmed that during a heat wave in Saskatchewan. And made Mitch Clark wear, some jeans and a undershirt and then a fucking puffy winter coat.
Yeah, kind of a Marty McFly kind of vest thing, right?
Yeah, he's an evil Marty McFly. And and we had him like up in the attic of a church. It was the hottest day of the year.
I can imagine. Yeah,
and he's crawling through there, and I'm like, just the fact that he went that far for us was just so. I'll always be in debt to him.
So the film is done, and is it playing in festivals or anything like that? So what's the current status of everything with the film?
Yeah, so originally we were planning on doing our online release so we can just pop it up on YouTube or some kind of platform so we can share it with everyone, because a lot of people they can ride out a festival, like do the festival circuit for a couple of years. We're just not interested in doing that. We've had a great run so far. We got to play in some amazing places like Portland Horror, which was, a bucket list for me. I love that festival and like the kind of stuff they program. That was the first festival we were ever accepted into. So that was amazing. And then we played Fogfest in Newfoundland, and we played Las Vegas. We went down to Screamfest in Los Angeles and showed the film at the Chinese theater, which was highlight of my life. Absolutely. And we've been waiting to see if we get in this one other festival that we really wanted to play, and we were accepted, and we're playing at Calgary Underground Film Festival I believe we'll be playing April 22nd, and I'm going to be flying out there for that, and I think that's going to cap off our festival run.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
So people if they're interested in, do you have some kind of landing page for all this stuff for information about this film and also future films?
Yeah. No, I'd say to go to our Instagram, Druid's Hand. We have an Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, but I think the Instagram's the one that we utilize the most. And my own page is like you can find it probably from the Druid's Hand, but just Mitch Oliver _. And that's where I'm going to be gearing up right now to get working on my next one, and really excited because this is the first time I guess I'm sharing it, but bring Skot back on, and Scott's going to provide the music for this next one here. And it's just the most exciting shit.
I didn't know whether we were going public with that or not. I've been being very quiet.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fine to share that. It's I've been hard at work on another one, and so hoping to do another short, and this one is absolutely, without a doubt, like the goal is to get a feature made. Already the feature is mostly written at this point. We have all the beats planned out, and I got some really exciting people behind it, the talented folks out, and this will be my first one out in the Pacific Northwest in Vancouver. So, tapping into a lot of the people that I've gotten to know through the industry here, a lot of other hungry, creative, independent filmmakers who are coming on board. And I have an amazing producer, Patrick Tozer, who's just been the heartbeat of getting this made. And it's really, really exciting. I'm so stoked about this one. So
that's awesome, man.
Yeah. All the info for that would be like on my Instagram if anyone's interested.
And once again, what's that handle for the Instagram?
Mitch Oliver _. Awesome. Or Mitch Oliver. Yeah, there's too many Mitch Olivers out there.
And Scott, everyone knows about you because you were just on a few months ago. So,
Yeah. No. Everyone knows, they've already forgotten. No one cares.
Yeah. And the podcast, where can people find that? That's on all the streaming platforms and all that.
Yeah, Spotify, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, all of that. You can find the Terror Table. And we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well over there. And we're just gearing up to try and make a schedule of some exciting films to talk about, because we've been on kind of a dry spell of bad movies. We just reviewed Queen of the Damned and Dracula 2000, and our next one is Ghost Ship and Darkness Falls. And I said,
what are you doing, man?
It was New Metal March,
dude. I was gonna say I appreciate the New Metal March moniker, man. I was like, because I recently watched Queen of the Damned, like I think it maybe December last year.
Yeah,
and I was like, man, this music is like awful, dude. And I was like, we were having a joke about that. New metal in general is something that we joke around a lot at practice. Yeah.
No, it was a dark time, and how it worked its way into horror. And like there was an era there in the early 2000s where all of these teen horror movies just had jam-packed soundtracks of Limp Bizkit and Korn and all this other awful music that I do listen to. I'm a masochist.
There was there's like a weird, or there was, at least, it might still be going on, but there was like a weird resurgence of that style of music again.
Oh, it's happening.
Yeah. Because I remember the guy who Bobby Torres, the guy who recorded our last two records, he he's like he's got a studio here in New Jersey, and he's we talk all the time, and he's like, yeah, dude, there's like this interesting thing happened. This band came in and they described themselves as a new metal band. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, they called themselves a new metal band.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So
it's coming. Everything's cyclical. It's all coming back, unfortunately. Jinko jeans are going to be next.
That was like one of the worst styles, I think.
Oh yeah.
The gigantic pants and t-shirts, and just
chain wallets.
For people
who aren't bikers.
Yeah, I've rocked with the chain wallet for a large period of my life. I can't really front on a chain wallet.
There's a different kind of. I'm talking about the chain wallet on the Jinko jeans.
Oh,
like the really extensive long. And there was like I don't know if it was a Canadian chain, but Scott will absolutely know about this. But Randy River, it was this like apparel store that just had the worst. It was all like new metal looks, and like it was like bargain bin goth store.
Yeah, because we didn't have anything that's what do they call them?
Hot Topic.
Hot Topic. Yeah, we don't have anything like that. It's a lot cleaner. And like, I mean, honestly, like, I mean, I've never shopped for my clothes at a mall. So I'm still wearing, I literally am still wearing some of the same t-shirts I was wearing in high school. So I mean, I'm nobody to be talking about fashion, but yeah, that was at one point in time, the thing that you were trying to approximate was looking like you were a member of fucking, I don't know, whatever, Spine Shank or something
Static
like that.
Spine Shank.
I was trying to come up with one that wasn't Limp Bizkit. Being a member of Boba Flex. That's a real band name.
Jesus.
Did you guys ever check out that the Tommy Lee new metal band that he had?
Oh my God. Yeah. I stumbled upon that recently. I had no idea that existed, but I just came across it, and that's dark shit.
I remember when that was around. I mean, I think we might have even talked about this when I was on your pod last time, Mike, but like, I mean, that was a big like line in the sand for me, was when music like that was starting to really take a strong hold. Like I just threw my hands up and said, like, I'm out, I'm not doing this. Like my first band started off as being like, I mean, it started in elementary school. So like, I mean, we didn't know what was going on, but we made, decisions were starting to be made fashion wise that were making me go like, we're starting to look like, well, not we, I was dressed the way I'm dressed today, but everyone else, they were starting to look like clowns to me. And it was because everyone was looking like, they were starting to look like the Coal Chamber. They were starting to look like members of Coal Chamber. And also, I mean, the music was tipping into that direction. I just kind of went like, I don't think I like heavy music anymore. This is really, really stupid, which is probably around I was like, oh, hey, what's this Joy Division thing? And then I took care of myself for quite a few years. But that stuff was so abject to me and so antithetical to like true like especially a kind of music that's supposed to be rooted in discontent, in rage and everything like that. It was never any more evident that it was manufactured than at that point in history. And I just like, it made me want to puke. And it still does. I mean, there's bands under that umbrella that I think have
Deftones.
Interesting things.
Deftones is still great. I'm a big Deftones fan.
I'm one of those people that I guess you would put on the apologist list as far as like I can't hang with anyone who's going to sit there and tell me that they're a new metal band. I can't even like, it's such a dumb conversation. I don't have the stomach for it. But like, I mean, there's lots of bands that I think were like, I mean, it was what was predominant. So there's creative people working within that realms of that stuff, or people that maybe have a shadowy history. They're, doing really good music now that come from that era or whatever. That's fine. But I mean, I know for me, that was a nauseous period of music.
See, and I was 10 years old, so right. I get a pass.
Yeah,
you do.
Yeah, that's a different. That you definitely get a pass for that.
Yeah.
The Tommy Lee was going through his adventures with Pamela Anderson, I believe, when he was doing his new metal phase.
Yeah. And then he switched to his acoustic stuff, which was equally exhilarating.
I don't think I've experienced any of that stuff. I didn't realize he had acoustic records.
Or I guess when I say acoustic, it actually, I think he described it as that. There's an album called Tommyland.
Tommyland.
And it's just the most like, I don't even know how you like just, oh God, it's just it's terrible. It's terrible music.
Peak Tommy Lee for me, and like in my life, like the most hilarious thing, and like a new low for him, which I think, I'm thinking about it. It's lower than his new metal band. Was I saw Motley Crue before they had come back around and been cool again. They were on a reunion tour, and it just hadn't, like, the wave hadn't started for them again yet. They weren't packing theaters. They were eating shit in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. It was not a good scene. It was like it was a pretty empty arena, and I got free tickets from a friend's dad's friend or something like that. And there was a point in the show where he had just gotten out of prison for domestic abuse. Speaking of Pamela Anderson, as I recall, I think she was the one who was had him sent to jail. And And he went out and did a speech about how he had been thinking about all of us while he was in there and all this, and went on this big thing. And it was just a third of full arena of people chanting his name because while he was in prison on a domestic abuse rap, was thinking about all of us. And then he cried while everyone chanted his name for like 10 minutes. It was the most insane thing I've ever seen.
He's not a narcissist at all.
No. And then the next time I saw him, because that was not the only time that I saw Motley Crue for free, he because he's always got to have some trick or something he does live, with his drum kit, whether he gets in a ball and then drops the ball on the audience and crushes people or whatever it is that he's doing this time around. He had his drum kit was hooked up to this it was like a roller coaster that ran across the ceiling of the arena. And it was just him half drumming along to this really bad DJ mix of a bunch of different songs. And I've been back and reviewed the tape because, this is well into the everyone recording everything that goes on at a concert phase. And it is hilariously stupid to watch. If you check out any footage of Tommy Lee doing his drum roller coaster, what an embarrassing thing for someone to do with their time and your money. Like wild bullshit. Like, I mean, his new metal band is embarrassing, but he doesn't stop coming up with things to be embarrassed about.
No, he's doing like I can't believe this tangent on Tommy Lee right now, but he's doing like a rap, like he's rapping now.
Oh
too.
God.
Yeah. Tommy Lee at this current age is rapping.
What's the name of this? What's the name of this project? What's the project's name?
I think it's just under, like, I just looked up on Spotify, and I think it's just, if you search up Tommy Lee, it's one of the most recent ones.
Oh man.
I came across it because I was watching, I tried watching that the Hulu show. About Pam and Tommy, and then I was like, fell down the rabbit hole and this horrible human being.
That's funny. Yeah, man, that's a great way to end the podcast episode. Our discussion of new metal and Tommy Lee. Well, thanks a lot, guys, and I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to finding out when the next movie's coming out and everything. So definitely stay in touch about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for inviting us on, man. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, guys. Have a good evening. Take care.